It is late now. Wherever you are, in a bed, in a chair, on a couch with the television off and the room half dark, you can stop. You do not have to hold anything up anymore tonight. Not your shoulders, not your jaw, not the list of things you did not finish today. Let your eyes close if they want to close. You do not need them for this. Everything here can be heard. For the next half hour, we are going to walk slowly through 5 old, quiet places in Scripture. Not to study them, not to take notes, not to remember them in the morning. This is not a lesson you need to pass. This is not a sermon you need to apply. This is not a puzzle you need to solve before you are allowed to rest. This is simply a place to lie down inside of. 5 moments when God met someone who was tired or afraid or awake when they needed to be asleep and gave them what they needed instead. You do not have to carry tonight the way you carried today. Say that back to yourself, quietly, in your own head, if you want to. You do not have to carry tonight the way you carried today. Today is done. It has already happened. There is nothing left in it for you to fix. Before we begin, just one small thing, and then we will not mention it again for the rest of the video. If this is the kind of company you like at the end of a long day. A slow voice, an old story, a little bit of quiet. You already know where to find this channel again. That is all. Now let it go. We are not going to ask anything else of you tonight. Let your breathing slow down. Not on purpose. Just let it happen, the way it happens right before sleep, when the breath gets longer without you telling it to. Here is the first place we are going to rest tonight. A hillside. Some sheep. An old man remembering. He is called David. And by the time he wrote the words we are about to walk through, he was not a boy anymore. You may already know him as the boy who stood in a valley with 5 smooth stones and a sling, facing something enormous. You may know him later still as a king, older, carrying the weight of a whole nation on a pair of tired shoulders. But before any of that, before the giant, before the crown, before the years that wore lines into his face, he was a shepherd. And somewhere in the middle of his life, worn down by everything a king has to carry, he remembered what it was like to simply follow someone who knew where the water was. "The Lord is my shepherd," he wrote. "I shall not want." Picture the pasture the way David would have pictured it, lying somewhere between memory and prayer. Grass so green it looks almost unreal in the evening light. No noise except wind moving through it, and the low, occasional sound of sheep settling down for the night, the way sheep do when they finally feel safe enough to lie all the way down. He makes me lie down in green pastures. Notice that. He makes me lie down. Not forces, not the way you might force a stubborn animal. He makes me lie down the way a good shepherd gets a nervous, restless sheep to finally stop pacing. Sheep do not lie down easily. They startle at almost nothing. They need to know there is no threat nearby, no hunger waiting to catch them off guard, no tension between them and the rest of the flock before their legs will finally fold and let them rest. A shepherd who understands his sheep does the work of removing every one of those fears, one at a time, until the animal simply cannot help but lie down. You are allowed to think of yourself that way tonight. Nervous, restless, in need of someone to remove the reasons you are still pacing. He leads me beside still waters, not loud water, not fast water, rushing and unpredictable. Still water, the kind a frightened animal can actually drink from without being afraid of being swept away. David knew the difference. A sheep will die of thirst standing beside a raging stream, because it is too afraid to put its face down near that kind of current. It takes a shepherd to find the slow bend in the river, the quiet pool, the place where the water holds still long enough to be trusted. He restores my soul. 3 words in the old language behind this line all point at the same idea. Bringing something back to what it was always supposed to be, not adding something new. Restoring, the way you might mend something that already existed but had gotten worn down, twisted, tired, past the point of recognizing itself. That is what David is describing. Not a new soul, his own soul, given back to him. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even when the road curves somewhere you cannot see the end of, someone who knows the way is walking just ahead of you, choosing the ground before you have to. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Notice what David does not say. He does not say the valley disappears. He does not say there is a shortcut around it. He says he walks through it, present tense, still in it, and does not fear, for one single reason. Not because the valley got smaller, because someone is with him in it. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. A shepherd carries 2 things. A rod, to fight off whatever might come for the flock in the dark, and a staff, the long crook, to gently pull a wandering sheep back before it gets too far from the others. Not one or the other, both. Strength for what threatens you, and a gentle hook for when you simply drift. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. A table set in the middle of danger, not after the danger passes, in the middle of it, somewhere close enough to see the enemy, and still calm enough to eat. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Let that last part sit for a moment. Not goodness and mercy waiting for him somewhere far ahead. Goodness and mercy following him, behind him. The way a good dog follows an old man down a familiar road, close enough that he never has to check if it is still there. You do not have to carry tonight the way you carried today. Somewhere behind you right now, whether you can feel it or not, something gentler than you expect is following close. Let your shoulders fall a little more. If they have not already, let them. Now we move somewhere else. A hillside again, but a different one. A different kind of tired man. His name was Elijah, and by the time we find him lying under a solitary tree in the wilderness, he had just done something enormous. He had stood alone against 450 prophets of a false god, called down fire from heaven in front of an entire nation, and watched God answer him in a way nobody in that crowd could argue with. It should have been the best day of his life. And then a single threat from a furious queen named Jezebel undid him completely. He ran. Not toward danger this time. Away from it, alone, for a full day's journey into the wilderness. until he finally collapsed under a broom tree, the kind of low, scraggly juniper that barely offers shade, and asked God to let him die. "It is enough," he said. "Take my life. I am no better than the ones who came before me." Here is what most people miss about this part of his story. God does not answer that prayer with a lecture. He does not remind Elijah of the fire on the mountain, or ask him to explain why one threat from one angry woman could undo a man who had just faced down 450 prophets and an entire kingdom. God does something smaller than any of that, and stranger. He lets him sleep. An angel touches him and says, simply, "Arise and eat." There is bread baked on hot coals and a jar of water right there beside his head, as if someone had been quietly preparing it while he slept. Elijah eats a little and lies back down, and the angel lets him sleep again. Twice. God's first response to a man who wanted to die is not correction. It is food and rest and food again. Before one single word of instruction, before any command to get up and go back to work. Rest first, then strength. Then, only then, the road ahead. You are allowed to notice that about yourself tonight, if it helps. Maybe what you needed first was never a plan. Maybe it was simply this: permission to lie down under the nearest tree and be fed before anyone asks anything else of you. Strengthened by that food, Elijah walks 40 days and 40 nights until he reaches a cave on Mount Horeb, the same mountain where God once spoke to Moses out of a burning bush. And there, in the mouth of that cave, Elijah hears a voice ask him a simple question: "What are you doing here?" And a great wind tears the mountainside apart. But God is not in the wind. And an earthquake shakes the ground under him. But God is not in the earthquake. And a fire passes by close enough to feel its heat. But God is not in the fire either. And after all of that enormous, world-shaking noise, there comes something the old language calls a still, small voice. Some translators have called it a sound of thin silence. An almost nothing, quieter than quiet. The kind of sound you would miss entirely if you were still listening for the wind, or the earthquake, or the fire. Elijah wraps his face in his cloak when he hears it. Not because it frightens him, because he finally recognizes it. You have probably spent most of today listening for the loud things, the next thing that needed doing, the next demand, the next worry, the next noise pulling at your attention. Tonight, you do not have to listen for any of that. Tonight, you are only listening for the almost nothing, the thin silence. The voice so quiet it can only be heard by someone who has finally stopped bracing for the wind. Let your hands go loose, wherever they are resting right now. You do not need them for anything else tonight. Here is a third place. Water again. But this time, dangerous water. At night, in the middle of a storm. It happened on the Sea of Galilee, a lake known for sudden, violent squalls that could rise out of almost nowhere, driven by cold air pouring down off the surrounding hills into warm air sitting over the water. Jesus and his disciples had set out across it in the evening. Several men who had spent much of their lives on that very lake, fishermen who knew its moods better than most. And partway across, Exhausted from a long day of teaching, a crowd that had pressed in on him from every direction, Jesus lay down in the stern of the boat, on a cushion, and fell asleep. While he slept, the storm came. Waves broke over the sides of the boat faster than the men could bail them out. The wind howled loud enough to make shouting necessary just to be heard over it. Water pooled around their feet, then their ankles. These were men who had weathered storms on this lake before, and even they were afraid. And Jesus slept through it. Think about that for a moment, the way it actually happened, not the way a painting makes it look calm and pretty. This was not gentle rocking. This was a boat taking on water, in the dark, in a genuine storm, with experienced fishermen convinced they might drown. And somewhere in the middle of all of that noise and danger, one man was sound asleep. You may know a version of this feeling yourself. Think of the last time you were a passenger on a long night drive, tired enough that you finally let yourself drift off in the seat, trusting the person driving to stay awake so you did not have to. There is a particular kind of sleep that only happens when you trust the person steering more than you trust your own ability to stay alert. That is closer to what was happening in that boat than fear might suggest. Jesus was not unaware of the storm. He was simply not afraid of it. Finally, the disciples could not stand it any longer. Peter, most likely, the one who so often spoke first among them, shook him awake. "Teacher, don't you care that we are about to die?" And Jesus stood up in a rocking boat, in the wind, in the dark, and said two words to the storm itself: "Peace, be still." The old word behind peace here is shalom, not simply the absence of noise, but a kind of wholeness, everything back in its right place. And the wind stopped, not gradually, immediately. The waves went flat, the way water goes flat in a bowl once. Whatever was stirring it's a great calm, the text says. Not a small one. A great calm, settling over water that had nearly swallowed a boat full of grown men minutes before. Then Jesus turned to the men still standing there, soaked, breathing hard, and asked them a quieter question than you might expect. "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" Notice he did not scold them for waking him. He did not seem irritated at having his sleep interrupted. His only question was about the fear itself, as if the actual danger, even in the middle of it, had never been the point. There may be a storm somewhere in your life right now, water coming in faster than you can bail it out. You do not have to solve it tonight. The one thing this story asks of you is smaller than that. Just to notice that peace, real peace, has already spoken to worse water than whatever you are facing, and that voice does not need you awake to keep working. Let your breathing slow down a little more. Here is a fourth place, older than any of the others. Not a hillside, not a wilderness, not a lake. The very beginning of everything. 6 days, Scripture says, God worked. Light out of darkness, sky out of formlessness, land pulled up out of water, and green things growing on it. The sun and the moon set into their places. Every living creature, in the water and in the air and on the ground. And on the 6th day, a man and a woman, made in his own image, set into a garden already finished and waiting for them. And on the 7th day, God rested. Sit with that for a moment, because it is stranger than it sounds. God did not rest because he was tired. God does not grow tired the way you and I do. He rested because rest itself was part of the design. Not an afterthought, not a recovery from exhaustion, but a deliberate, built-in rhythm woven into the very shape of time from the first week the world existed. The old word for this kind of rest is menucha. Not simply stopping, the way a machine stops when you switch it off, but something closer to settling, dwelling, coming home into stillness on purpose. It is the same root behind the name Noah, a man whose very name meant rest, born generations later into a world that desperately needed some. The historian Josephus, writing centuries afterward about the customs of his own people, described how a Jewish household would prepare for the Sabbath before the sun even went down on a Friday evening. Lamps lit ahead of time, food already made, work deliberately set down so that rest did not have to be scrambled for at the last minute. Rest, in other words, was never something that was supposed to happen by accident. It was something you built ahead of time, on purpose, the way you might make a bed in the afternoon so it is ready for you at night. You are allowed to think of tonight that way. Not an accident, not something you are squeezing in between one obligation and the next. Something built, on purpose, into the shape of how you were made to live. The same rhythm God set into the world on the seventh day, still there, still available, still waiting for you to lie down inside it. One more place, and then we will let this video grow quiet. People used to bring their children to Jesus, Scripture tells us, simply so he could touch them and bless them. Nothing more complicated than that. And the disciples, perhaps thinking he was too busy, too important, too tired from the crowds pressing in on him all day, tried to turn the families away. But when Jesus saw this, he was displeased. "Let the little children come to me," he said, "and do not stop them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these." And then he did something very simple. He took the children up in his arms, laid his hands on them, and blessed them. Picture that for a moment, slowly. Small children, tired from a long day, the same as everyone else in that crowd, lifted up into arms strong enough to hold them without effort, safe enough that they did not need to hold themselves up anymore. No instructions given to them, no test to pass first, just held and blessed, simply for being small and having been brought. You are allowed to imagine yourself there tonight, however old you actually are. Nobody in that story asked the children to prove they belonged in those arms. They were simply brought and received and held. We are near the end now, so let your voice, if you have been saying anything back quietly this whole time, go silent too. You do not need to respond to anything else tonight. 5 places. A pasture with still water and a table set in the middle of danger. A tree in the wilderness with bread waiting beside a sleeping man's head. A boat in a storm with someone asleep who was never actually afraid. A 7th day built on purpose into the shape of the world so rest would always have somewhere to land. And a pair of arms strong enough to hold you without needing anything back. An old song, much older than any of tonight's stories, says it simply, "In peace I will lie down and sleep, for it is you alone, Lord, who makes me dwell in safety." Not because nothing dangerous exists tonight, not because every worry has been solved before morning, simply because safety, real safety, was never something you had to hold on to by yourself in the first place. You do not have to carry tonight the way you carried today. Let your eyes stay closed now, if they have not already. Let your breathing be slow and long and entirely unremarkable. There is nothing left to listen for, nothing left to solve, nothing left to hold. Rest now. Sleep.